Morning, everyone. This is the April 3rd, 2024 meeting of the Dunn County Planning, Resource and Development Committee. Looks like the whole committee is present, so we have a quorum. Approval of the minutes from March 20th. Do I have a motion? Super Morris. Barrier, seconds. Any corrections or additions? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, say no. Minutes are approved. So we, public comments. Tom, you said you had something came in last night?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. We received one written public comment by email that came in. Have it up on the screen here. So it was received Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024, 11:15 to the Resource Planning and Development Committee. I've spoken before in favor of allowing ADUs, but I'd like to speak specifically to the concern raised at the public hearing about the ways that ADUs might change single-family residential areas. The fact is that the world we live in is changing, and the character of our neighborhoods is bound to change as a result, regardless of zoning. As our elders age out of their homes, and with young people increasingly struggling to afford home ownership, along with many other shifting conditions, the question is,
It's me. Sorry. I'm me.
The fact is that the world we live in is changing, and the character of our neighborhoods is bound to change as a result, regardless of zoning. As our elders age out of their homes, and with young people increasingly struggling to afford home ownership, along with many other shifting conditions, the question is not should things change, but rather how can we make the best of the changes that are coming. Many communities have adopted ADUs as one strategy to adapt to changing times. ADUs can facilitate multi-generational households, bring in supplemental income to help mitigate the expenses of home ownership, bring added revenue to the town, and add gentle density that increases housing options in the community without damaging rural or neighborhood character, and without adding to sprawling developments that encroach on agricultural land or wild spaces. We have the opportunity to create a valuable option to keep our community vibrant. I sincerely hope that the committee will be able to resolve any concerns and that you will choose to allow for the building of ADUs. Thank you for taking the time to read this comment and for all the work you have put in on this issue. Marie Kildee, N5510 50th Street, Wilson, Wisconsin.
Thank you. Thanks, Marie, for the comments. Anybody else from the public want to share some thoughts? We'll try and include you in our discussion as we go along. So though I guess we recessed the public hearing. So we have staff reports. Your annual report, Heather.
Good morning, everyone. My annual report's included in the packet here. I can highlight some of the goings on that we've worked through for the last year. Otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to ask questions. If you have any feedback, is there anything that you'd like to see when I present this to the full board? I guess coming up here in a couple weeks. I take any feedback if there's anything. I know in this report I didn't do any comparisons. Normally I'll kind of compare from year to year the number of recordings and revenues, which I did not include in this report, but I can just take you through this, I guess. We hired Christy Dunn. She's been with us for 6 months due to a retirement. So that was a change. We hadn't had any turnover in 9 years. So working through that, and Christy's part-time, she's 20 hours a week. So the office purpose and services provided, you hear about that probably monthly from me. Our financial breakdown is on the next page. And you can see our revenues are down. I didn't include the levy in the general fund revenue area, but that's the breakdown of our fees. And then the summary is at the bottom there. You can see that we used $49,000 in levy this year, which that isn't typical for our department. Yeah, do you want to keep going, Tom? Little history on the Register of Deeds office. And then our key achievements. Here I mentioned we recorded 4,998 documents. And if I take a look at the last 10 years, that's the fewest amount of documents we've recorded in the last 10 years. So it's a pretty substantial difference. I can, even through the pandemic, and those were busy years. We recorded in 2021 9,218 documents compared to 4,998 last year. And that, the number of documents we record, it's impacted by obviously the housing market, with rates, mortgage interest rates being higher, lower, housing inventory, higher prices, that's all impacted with that all impacts, the amount of documents we record and how busy we are. You'll see the land development. Oh, sorry, Tom. See the land development. Tom kind of shares some with his certified survey maps that he's approving. Then they end up in our office for filing. 97 compared to 104 in 2022. Like Tom has mentioned before too, not all certified survey maps mean new construction, but it could potentially be that a certified survey map could mean that there is new development, I guess. The achievements, what else do we have here, Tom? Development and training, just kind of highlighting what our staff, what we work on throughout the year. And then I also included challenges, and this is just what we encounter throughout the year. I mean, cybersecurity is always an issue, making sure our records are protected, and the federal privacy legislation that was passed for the federal judges that could potentially require us to shield a public record, which there's concerns, unintended consequences with leaving holes in our indexes where you might not be able to see all the records that could affect a parcel of land. And the inability to control the workload. Again, we just don't know day to day if we're going to be recording 40 documents or if we're going to record 20 documents. And the last 2 days were a good example. We were closed on Friday, so on Monday, then we recorded probably double what we would normally record. And then again yesterday, and then we had someone out sick. So then it's just a matter of kind of making sure we have the coverage, and we just don't always know what our workload is going to entail day by day. And then I think I've kept you kind of in the loop on those legislative initiatives that we were working through last year. Not everything made it through the legislation, but all of that was time consuming as we kind of worked through all of those. The discriminatory restrictive covenants that has passed now in 2024, and the judicial officer security has also passed. So we will be working through that. That has a 13-month implementation. So we'll be working through a lot of the details on that, how we shield the records and how we receive the requests from the judicial officers. And then the personal property tax repeal. And there have been changes then to the statewide vital record information system, which is our filing system for filing death and marriage records. And then also that's where we issue our copies of vital records through that system as well. So The community outreach is the honor rewards program. That is the veterans program that veterans can sign up to receive discounts through participating businesses. And then property fraud alert, which that has kind of taken off. You hear a lot about property fraud in the news. And so we get a lot of calls where people want to sign up for this. It's a free notification service. It's not a prevention program, but it does allow you to receive a notice if a document is recorded in our office. And then that's a picture I took out front of this building facing the west one evening after I was leaving the office. So, yeah, so again, I take any feedback. If there's anything that you'd like to see or to hear more about.
Any
Thank you.
questions, suggestions for Heather? Gary?
I just one question. I see there's 306 death records. How about like the number of babies born? Are we kind of keeping even?
Mm. That is a good question. We don't file the actual birth records anymore, so I don't track the births.
Okay,
The state, the birth records go directly from the hospital or the birthing center to directly to the state. So we have access to those records, but we don't actually file the birth records anymore. Mhm.
I was wondering, regarding the discriminatory restrictive covenants, you led a little bit of a project with somebody to look into how many of those are in Dunn County? Is that right? Or am I?
We did not.
Oh.
Well, you're right. We did when we did work, we had an intern through CBTC last year, and we did have her do a little research just to see if she could find any of these types of covenants within our records. And she did. I don't have a number exactly, but there would be a potential that we could receive a document now where landowners have the ability to record a form that basically it basically discounts the restrictions itself. They're unlawful, they're illegal, they're unenforceable, but it does allow a landowner, if they are aware of a discriminatory restrictive covenant in the history, in the title of the property, that they can record a document that says that they don't agree with those covenants. But that form will be available through the Department of Administration. And I don't actually have a count of how many we might potentially see. We might not see any. I don't really know if a lot of people how strongly they'll feel about recording this, or if they'll come in and do research to determine if there's something like this in the history of their, in the history of the title of their property. I don't think, if you don't have an abstract, you might not know, you might not be aware of those, but I haven't actually pulled together. I don't actually have numbers, I guess, of how many documents might be affected.
Okay. Yeah, I feel in general that this is one of the more interesting things that I've heard of, coming from your office. I feel like it's something worth highlighting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the U of M, they did research, and Milwaukee County did have the university come in and do a bunch of research, and they helped try to assist them with, using OCI, optical character recognition to OCR to see if they could find these types of covenants within their records. And they did a lot of work on that, but we haven't had anyone really ask about that, but we'd certainly be willing to help or show anyone that wanted to research their property to find that, to see if there are any.
Thanks, Monica. Anybody else? That's great, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to split, that's fine.
Thank you.
So the only other thing on our agenda is to sort of continue our discussion on text amendments, chapter 13. And so we recessed the hearing, and seems to me like, I'm open to suggestions, but seems like, to me, it would be like, let's have some review of what we learned from the hearing and any observations that the committee has. And then the biggest, and I guess, Gary, you submitted some thoughtful material that maybe you'd like to make some comments on, and then sort of sort through what our options are for next steps going forward. And with that, any observations from the hearing?
Mr. Chairman, I did think that there were concerns expressed at the last meeting that changes had been made in the actual ordinance text that Supervisor Kinnear particularly wanted us to go through. Maybe we should do that first. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that what you'd like to do? Okay. All right, let's clarify that then. Mike, you want to highlight the ones you were thinking about? Or Christian, do you know? Yep.
Christian has done a nice,
Yeah.
nice format here where he's explained them. And I don't think it'd take too long to go through through all of it. There are just some additions that were forgotten.
Right. So I think most notably was in R3. I don't know if you guys have documents up in front of you or not, but it was that addition to kind of the language governing permitted accessory structures where we needed to allow for human habitation in the case of accessory dwelling units. We had placed that language in R1 and R2, but because we hadn't explicitly changed anything in R3, and R3 references R1 and R2, we needed to include those changes in R3 as well. So that's been done. Those changes are present in both documents that were sent out in the packet. That's the 13.2.5.05 section. So that change has been made. I believe that's the only change that was explicitly discussed. Supervisor Kinnear mentioned some concerns about taking out the language in subordinate in use, and I think we discussed that, I believe, to Supervisor Kinnear's satisfaction. I noted a number of kind of other concerns that kind of arose just from knitting kind of our language into the ordinance as a whole. It still has to do with that language governing permitted accessory structures. So that language reads, permits must be issued for a permitted principal structure before a permit will be issued for accessory structures. Accessory structures shall not be designed or used in part. Just a moment, my computer wants to restart.
Oh, yeah.
Could we increase the screen text size at all? Is that possible or is that not?
So I have it right now so that you can see the actual ordinance document next to chapter
Okay.
13. If you like, I can close one or the
No,
other and
that's
zoom
fine.
in,
That's fine.
but just let me know.
That's fine.
So, and then accessory structures not be designed or used in part or whole for human habitation or any unauthorized accessory uses unless properly permitted as an accessory dwelling unit. It's kind of two issues here. First, that cannot be used in whole or in part for human habitation. We create this exception for accessory dwelling units, but all of these residential districts also allow for bed and breakfasts. And there's no exception in our ordinance language here to allow for those to exist. So right now we have a conflict. We allow bed and breakfasts, which would presumably, people would be staying in them for periods of time. And then in this other section, we have a restriction on human habitation at all. Kind of my preference at this point would be to simply eliminate this restriction on human habitation. Our uses generally don't allow for them regardless the accessory uses. Just looking at R3, swimming pools, tennis courts, greenhouses, storage sheds. None of these uses encompass human habitation regardless. So I don't think it's opening the doors to anything. Kind of having these restrictions present in multiple places creates issues when we try and go back and amend the ordinances, because we have to track, this restriction is present in 3 different places. It needs to be changed in 3 different places, and somebody has to know that it exists in 3 different places beforehand. And it's extremely difficult to track. And as you can see, we've discovered these things on multiple occasions. So that's the first issue that I think we could discuss.
Any comments from the committee?
That's the first issue. In this little spot right here, or issue?
Well, it's kind of that same issue exists in R1, R2, R3. I mean, the language, it's exactly the same, that we've basically moved between the 3 different sections.
Okay, and is Airbnb or bed and breakfast a permitted use in R1, R2, and R3?
Yeah, it's a permitted accessory use.
In R1 also?
Yep.
Okay. It scares me to start making more and more changes though. Because people look for ways to get around things. And if you look around, unfortunately, we will see things like this, but it would scare me to take that out. And if it could be left in without causing a big problem, other than, gee, we have to remember it next time, I just leave it as is.
That's the option. We could also include language in this section to say, unless properly permitted as an ADU or unless properly permitted as a bed and breakfast. This is, as the ordinance is currently written, it's not clear that even though we've allowed these bed and breakfasts in all 3 of our residential districts, that you could actually operate one. So I'm hesitant to just leave that error present, knowing that it exists now, but I understand if the committee doesn't want to expand the scope of what you're doing.
There's going to be a rewrite after our comprehensive plan, I assume. And I would think that would be a real good time to pick on these kinds of things.
Mr. Chairman, just pertinent to Mike's point, if we are thinking about revising the zoning ordinance in a way that makes it more user-friendly, understandable, whatever, can this issue, if we leave it as is, can this issue be addressed then? Or, I mean, I don't know here.
I don't think we have any trouble with the language as it pertains to ADUs, but it was just an error. We noticed that there's a conflict in the ordinance, and at least want to bring it to the committee's attention. But over you.
So I'm trying to follow the issue. So there's 2 things. One, it's not user-friendly, and 2, there's a conflict. Can you restate the conflict part again?
So the conflict is that in all 3 of our residential districts, we permit bed and breakfast, essentially. At the same time, in the language governing permitted accessory structures, we say those structures can't be used for human habitation at all. And there's no exception in that language for bed and breakfast. So not clear how you could essentially use that permitted bed and breakfast use, which presumably would entail some human habitation.
Could,
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. So you explained that beautifully. I just want to say it. This is basically saying, hey, you can't have human habitation and an accessory structure unless it's an ADU and it's permitted. We're not saying anything about Airbnbs. So my thought was, what if we just took out, unless properly permitted and ended it there? And that way it would leave it open to those things. But right now, as it's written, we're totally ignoring bed and breakfasts. And if we leave it this way, I don't think I can permit a bed and breakfast anymore. So that's kind of the summary there.
So it sounds like this needs to be dealt with in one way or another. That it's not just ease of use, right?
Could you go over your suggestion again, Ann, real quick?
Sure. So I'm sorry, Kristen, to just say this right at
That's
this
fine.
moment, but it came to me as the discussion was going on. The proposed change right now is to add unless properly permitted as an accessory dwelling unit pursuant to section 13.3.17. My suggestion is that we end that sentence at unless properly permitted. So we're not addressing it something very specific, but we're just saying if it's permitted properly, then it's okay.
I think that would solve it. To just be clear that, yes, if a permit has been issued for that accessory use and accessory building, you can allow human habitation in it. And I think that human habitation restriction, it's present in the nature of all the uses we've kind of identified in our ordinance. There's very few uses that would, other than the bed and breakfast, I mean, these very clearly are not uses that would encompass people living in these buildings. So I don't think it's opening the door to, people all of a sudden, converting their greenhouses into living spaces or something. Right.
Garden sheds.
But it does make clear to people that it's not permitted.
Correct.
Yeah, so leaving it in wouldn't hurt with Ann's suggestion unless there's some kind of unintended consequences with that. But it'd be nice if we kind of focus it on the ADU thing today and not
Yeah.
make too many changes.
So that's that issue. And I think
Well, without objection, let's make that change. Okay.
the second issue, kind of I noted at the top of the proposed ordinance, the restriction on multiple primary.
Can you give us a line number? Or-
Yeah. Do you have the section number? I
Yeah.
can't.
So at the top of the proposed ordinance, line 11, I put a comment that I believe is visible.
Oh, yeah.
Says we need to address 13.2.2 sub B.
13.2.03. No, 13.2.3.
13.2. Yeah, 13.2.2 sub B.
Oh. 13.2 point.
And that won't be visible in the proposed ordinance, but it is visible in that document that incorporated all the language changes. It should be page 6 of that. Yeah, it's page 5 in the kind of complete ordinance. Yeah. All right, so here it is, and it reads, except in the case of condominiums or as otherwise provided in this ordinance, not more than one principal building or use and its accessory buildings or uses may be located on a lot or parcel of land. As I'm sure you guys are aware, our attached ADUs are, as currently written, permitted as principal uses. So we need to either create an exception in our attached ADUs to say essentially both this and another principal use can exist And this will be compliant with 13.2.2 sub B. The other option, of course, is eliminating this language altogether, but that, similar to Supervisor Kinnear's previous concerns, that's a significant change, so I wouldn't want to do that. So kind of, as this is written, one principal use is all that can exist on a parcel. And as we want to permit attached accessory dwelling units, those would be attached to a single family dwelling. So you'd have that single family dwelling. You'd have the attached ADU. That would be two principal uses, which would violate this.
So the recommendation is to do what again?
So if we jump down to R1 in the proposed ordinance, I think it's to permitted to R1, almost there. Yeah. So here, when we have in R1 sub K, which is where we have our attached accessory dwelling units being permitted, we could just add, at the end of this, comma, and maybe constructed in addition to a prior existing principal use consistent with 13.2.2 sub B. And I'll clean up the language a bit, but at 13.
Could you say that again? I sort of lost it.
Sure, we could simply add language here that will say may be constructed in addition to another permitted principal use consistent with 13.2.2 sub B, which is that restriction on more than one principal use. And that restriction, again, contains language saying, hey, if there's language elsewhere in the ordinance that would allow you to have more than one of these, that's fine. So we don't actually need to change anything with that section.
Satisfactory? Okay, let's go with that.
I'm curious, Christian, if you have all this area memorized yet after reading through it so many times.
I do not, and I really don't want to get to that point.
Are you dreaming?
Those are the two big things that all right, so we might need to make that same sort of change to R2 and R3 because those do reference principal uses in. Did we eliminate that? I think having that change, as we've discussed, present in R1 will be sufficient. If you go to like R2 somewhere. Stop, go up back to the.
That was R2 permitted.
Yeah, so we can see our permitted principal uses in R2 reference the permitted principal uses in R1. So that same change we made there should be brought into R2. R3 kind of works the same way where it references R1 and R2. So those same changes, again, should be brought in by reference. So that should be fine for all three districts. Double check, Jenna.
A question, please?
Yeah,
Maybe I
sure.
didn't understand that. There can only be one principal use, right?
Correct.
So what happens if you just add a room onto the house you know, how do we know if it's gonna be a living quarter or just an addition to the house?
That's currently an issue we're facing right now. Truth is, I think, and we frequently don't.
So typically when someone's, proposing to put an addition on their house, if they contact our office, we'll ask them what the addition is for, just kind of some details, but we don't have any way of regulating or permitting it as specifically as living quarters and making sure that it goes through the building inspection and all those other things. So that's kind of the intent of including attached ADUs in the ordinance and explicitly saying this is a permitted principal use. That's kind of the intent there. Right now, if someone wants to do an addition and they put a dwelling in it, we'll probably never know. And also, the UDC inspector will never know either. So it's never inspected for electrical or, the sanitation system being connected properly and things like that.
Would that change if they decided to designate that as a rental unit? Is there any inspection required or standards required that would?
I guess that would be going into UDC and
Yeah.
to health
Right.
department things. We don't really regulate whether it's a rental unit or not.
That's not our purview. No.
Yep.
Anything else in this area?
There's no, that same change we discussed for R1, it needs to go in general ag too.
Okay.
Those were my two.
Okay. Shall we have a general discussion about the testimony at the hearing and thoughts about it or not? Anybody have any comments they want to make? Any lessons learned? Observations?
Well, I guess I'll go, Mr. Chairman, with your permission. I mean, I think Ms. Kilde's comments, I thought, were pretty apt this morning. There was this sort of sense created in the public hearing that suddenly residential single-family zoned areas were going to be inundated with mobile homes and container dwellings and so on, and I just don't think that is the case. We have a housing issue that is not going to go away. ADUs are not going to solve the housing issue, but they are going to contribute to solving it. I don't see that there are going to be thousands of accessory dwelling units that will entirely change the character of single-family residential districts. I think the design standards that Anne has incorporated in the revised ordinance should ease people's concerns about what these ADUs will look like, how they will be occupied. I mean, obviously, we can't account for, I don't know, we can't account for individual uses and so on, but I do think the ordinance as written, including permitting of accessory dwelling units in R1, is both appropriate and sufficient in terms of addressing towns and neighbors and residents' concerns. I guess I don't know what else to say. I don't think we are going to have thousands of accessory dwelling units suddenly popping up in single-family residential districts. I just don't see it.
Well, the other side now?
Yeah, right.
Sure.
There you go.
Let's do that.
We've been doing that all along. I recognize that you don't see it. But the two towns, three towns actually, did the unprecedented. We've never had it before where the entire board votes and says, we don't want it in R1. and I don't know if any of you have looked, but R1, if you took the town of Tanner and all the other R1s in the entire county, with the exception of town of Menominee, there are more in the town of Tanner, R1s, than the rest of the county. The same thing goes for the town of Menominee. There are more R1s in the town of Menominee than the rest of the county. The next biggest ones, like the Red Cedar, there are no R1s. So we have someone disagreeing with you. The people that live there are saying we disagree with your prognosis there. And I don't see how we can ignore something like that. Of course, it's always been my contention, but once we got that testimony from 2 town boards that have well over probably about 95% of the R1s, how are we the ones to say, no, you guys are wrong? Because if you think about it, this wasn't done by people that just, we're going to do R1 or we're going to do R2 or whatever. They spent probably a year or two doing the zoning and working with the county. I sat in a lot of meetings. I don't remember, I don't know about the other townships, but it's a cooperative process. And to say, you guys don't know, it's definitely not in my backyard. It's coming from intelligent people that are basing it on years of work with the land use plan, with doing the zoning only, 7, 8 years ago. So I was ready to move forward with the compromise that we had. None of us were particularly happy with it. But once we got this testimony, I say, look, every town board or every township in the county that's zoned said, fine, general ag, we'll go along with it. Fine, R3, we'll go along with it. Fine, R2 will go along with it. The only thing they've said is let's not do it in R1. So I'd have to go with them and eliminate the R1 proposal for ADUs detached.
Carrie.
And a question for Ann. Right now, the way our ordinance reads, can a person go to the Board of Adjustment and get approved for a ADU?
They're not a special exception use. So an attached accessory dwelling unit right now is not addressed in our zoning ordinance. So if they came to our office and that's exactly what they were proposing and it fit what we're kind of defining it as right now, they could do it. However, we would be permitting it as an addition. I mean, we really wouldn't. I guess we would be able to trigger like, hey, you're gonna need to address your septic system, but we wouldn't be able to apply any of the standards. So right now, they can do it, there's no standards attached.
So a detached ADU cannot be approved by the Board of Adjustment?
So a detached ADU is not allowed right now in R1, R2, R3. It's kind of allowed in GA, but we've talked about that before. It's not a special exception, it's just not allowed at all.
So the only way they could do it is just to like make not a zoning change, but what am I trying to say? Yeah, I suppose like a zoning change to add a building or a house.
Yeah, so
That's the
there,
only way.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt
that's
you.
okay.
So, right now, if someone wanted to do a detached accessory dwelling unit in R1, R2, R3, GA in some cases, you would have to either rezone to a district that allowed that,
Okay.
or you would have to split the parcel and go through that process. Right now, there really isn't, I mean, to get a zoning district that allows that, you would have to rezone to, I believe, general commercial. Actually, it might not even work in general commercial. There really isn't a zoning district that works in to have a primary dwelling and a secondary dwelling. It just does not work the way the ordinance is written right now. So there isn't even an option for rezoning. The only option would be to split the parcel and create a new lot and build it that way.
And I also like agree with Mike that when we have these townships that come in, and we're supposed to be like a cooperation between county zoning and the townships, and to have the county tell them, well, this is how your neighborhood is gonna look. I find that dictatorial. I find that, really unpleasant, because especially with the new like the rules coming in with after 5 years, we can like opt out if we wanna. I don't think anybody wants to opt out of county zoning. That's not, but they would still wanna not be just told, well, this is the way it's gotta be. When they sign up for it, there's certain rules, and if you come along in the middle and change the rules, then we should like respect, their opinion. Said, no, we don't want this for our area.
So I think this maybe I'd like to maybe take the opportunity to say that the planning and zoning department does not have an agenda to remove single family zoning or to even add ADUs to begin with. This is a PRND decision. This is the Board of Supervisors decision. We can help you draft the language. We can remove things. We can give you our expert opinion, but ultimately this is your decision and not ours. And we're just going to go with whatever you guys decide. So I just want to make it clear that we're not pushing for this, but we support it in a lot of forms. But ultimately, we want to support what you want.
Yeah, because I'm kind of caught in the middle, because I think there is like situations where an ADU would be like very appropriate. But to open up the whole county to it and say, well, it's permitted no matter what, with no second set of eyes looking at it, that's what causes me some concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Ann, for that clarification. That it clearly has been staff's position, the department's position all along, and we appreciate and respect that. Anybody else? Okay, you have any? We'll keep going until we run out of ideas here.
Well, I was wondering regarding R1, if there are some places where we could address some of the specific concerns. What I'm wondering about is concerns have been raised about the very small lots, right? People saying that, well, if they're very small, we shouldn't be putting a second dwelling on it. And I think that a number of us on this committee regarding the smaller lots have noted that because of the setbacks between the lake and the road, speaking specifically about Tanner Lake, that's not possible. So we haven't been worrying about that, but people are still raising those concerns and they make sense. I'm wondering if there's a way to more directly address those kinds of concerns about those very small non-conforming lots. Perhaps by saying, if the lot is already not meeting the minimum lot size, maybe ADU is not allowed. That would be one thought to sort of address some of the specific concerns that have been made.
I tend, after the testimony, I have found myself kind of coming down on more along Mike's lines on this, in that the principal concern, I really do believe that the intention of this committee and of the staff is that this be a collaborative process. And that is probably the most important thing. Having a contentious and contended process will not result in a good outcome for the county. So if we're going to move forward, we need to find a way to have it be a acceptable and collaborative decision by most parties. It seemed to me like the arguments against putting ADUs in residential areas, R1, maybe even any of the residential areas, I don't know, seems like that raises the most concern for people. Not just the aesthetics of it, but the septic considerations, the health considerations. Those are real, especially in certain parts of the county where we have a lot of density and where the areas where we might have the most pressure for ADUs. So, but I would hate to see that issue deter us from considering ADUs in other areas, general ag, for example. Now, I think there was Mike, you mentioned that you thought that none of the towns were concerned about general ag. I don't know if that's true. I believe Otter Creek's testimony was that they were opposed to it. Do you recall?
I do not recall. I thought Otter Creek echoed Tanner.
Almost exactly.
Yeah,
Is that your
Yeah,
memory? Okay, I didn't look it
pretty
up.
much so.
I
Yeah.
should have.
And when I say they all approved it, by not saying anything,
They didn't
Uh,
oppose it.
they didn't, yes, you always come up with the good ways of
Right.
saying it, yeah. But it hasn't been opposed, it's,
Well, I may be wrong about Otter Creek. I thought they had said that they were concerned about any ADUs whatsoever.
there were the president and vice president of the Plan Commission for the town of Elk Mound sent a notice saying that I think, this is my interpretation, that we're concerned about ADUs at all in any spot, but we could reread that if we needed to.
Can I just ask a question just when I'm working through this? So I believe the town of Otter Creek, and what was the other town that submitted that they were concerned about R1? Tanner,
And the
town of Elk Mound.
town of Menominee,
Town.
I think, I don't know if they did a printed one or not, but Ken Jackson came in.
Yeah.
And the town of Tanner did the written one. And I think the other town, Otter Creek, thank you very much, echoed the same as the town of Tanner. And then I think you might have asked, someone asked the town sheriff for the town of Elk Mound to just ask what they thought of it. I'm not sure.
I sent out the information to all of the towns, regardless of whether they were under county zoning or not, just because I feel like their opinion is still valuable, even if this might not directly apply to them. And the town of Elk Mound has, been verbally expressing some interest in some thoughts on it. I believe the chair is here today.
Yep.
You want to speak to us?
And while Tony's getting ready, we did receive a letter from Plan Commission people. From Elk Mound, yeah. Plan Commission Chair and Vice Chair, I think.
Yes, Tony Gustafson, E 630th Avenue, Elk Mound. I'm the chairman for the town of Elk Mound. Yes, our Plan Commission Chair and Vice Chair, had expressed concern about having two dwelling structures on one lot. And if the deal is the mother-in-law suite, when mother-in-law is no longer with us, then they get forced into, unless some other family member chooses to move there, they're forced into being a landlord. And then the Plan Commission is saying that we already have a minimum lot size, and if you put two dwelling structures on the minimum size lot, then when those people decide they do not want to be a landlord, they're going to be back to the Plan Commission looking for an exemption to split the lot size in half. Okay, so this is what their concern was. After the last summer, the one structure per lot, one dwelling structure per lot was taken out of the land division ordinance. I notified the town of Elk Mound of this and the board and the Plan Commission, and they chose to go back and add it into our land division ordinance. Okay. It's not a passive situation that they had looked at that and said they only wanted one per lot. At that time, we did change. We had a 2.5 acre minimum lot size, and we cut that back to 1.2 acre minimum lot size. We felt that, I think on shoreland zoning is at about a 0.6 acre minimum lot size. I'm thinking is about what it comes out to be, something like that. It's on a square foot. It's about 0.6. So we were still exceeding that. We're saying if the state feels that the 0.6 acres was enough to have a septic system, we still have twice as much area as that is, okay? But it will still allow, if the people in the town of Elk Mound, if they had built on the 2.5 acres, they could still split it and have 2 dwelling units. And my understanding is, that's, they can still have, they could have a shared driveway yet. Town of Elk Mound would require a maintenance agreement on the driveway, but they could have a shared driveway. And I understand they can still have a shared well. And I think they can have a shared septic is still permittable yet, or septic easements. So that in the town of Elk Mound, that would be an option for them if they want to put in another unit. But there still would be limited to the minimum lot size for each unit. Any questions on that? Otherwise, I had another thought here.
Any questions for Tony?
Okay. Ann was talking about that there's, the way it is right now, there is no legal way for everybody to have an ADU or either attached or especially detached, or and somewhat attached is a gray area. And I'm not thinking of the right wording, but you have standard uses and we have optional uses. I'm not, what's the right word on that? They'd have to come back to exempt, you know what I mean?
Or I can help you if you want.
Okay.
I think are you thinking of permitted uses and special exceptions or
Yes,
conditional
that's what,
uses?
yeah, conditional uses. That's what I want to say. One of the compromises I'm sitting here thinking is if you wrote into the code that it's a special use that would have to be, and you say, it could be say that it has to be approved by the town board of the town plan, by that town, then it's clearly defined. And if somebody wants to come in and do that, then that town can agree to have that happen. And but and if that town doesn't want to agree to it, they don't, but then it's clearly defined in there, and it may be easier to enforce it not to happen because it says it has to have the, permission of the town.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, would you sort of restate what you meant by that it would become a conditional use subject to the approval of the town board?
Yes.
Yeah?
That would be, then it's all the rules are in there, but then the town has to agree on it on a case by case basis. Or the town could say that you have one town that has no trouble with it, and they can say, you know, we pass a motion that they're all approved, and the county can just approve them.
Tony, do you see a problem coming on like down the road when you have 2 parcels or 2 like dwellings, 1 parcel and split? But they share a driveway, water, the well, and the septic. In time, it's gonna be kind of hard to, if one is kind of hard up and they can't afford to do an upgrade, I think it's gonna cause problems with all this shared stuff to sometimes to get some people to pay their share.
You're correct. You do have a potential of that. But if you have, it's, like I look at the driveway agreements, okay? If you have, if it's spelled out what happens, all right, then yeah. You're trying to prevent that from happening in the future. If there's a lot of people that choose to live in a condominium situation, all right, and I own my half, and you maybe own the other half, all right, but it's all clear that it doesn't matter what my financial situation is when it's time to change, when the board says we have to change the roofs, I have to pay in. Okay, so they would know that going, you know, but if you have them rules that it's attached to the deed or wherever we have it, on the town of Elk Mound, I think if there's we're requiring that the driveway easement be attached with the deed. Am I wording that right, Tom, on that? Is to how, so that that's attached so that they know when they purchase it, this is, there's an agreement to maintain the driveway. Obviously, they would somebody would have the chance to put in their own well or their own septic if they wanted to in the future.
No, I'm struck, thanks, Tony. You can stay there for a while if you would. But I'm struck by, going back to Marie Kilde's comments at the beginning, that we can expect, given the pressure on housing, that there will be new strategies, new models for ownership and development that are going to happen. And when you mentioned condominiums, I mean, if someone 50 years ago had described a condominium to many people, they would say, well, that never work. But they have. People have figured out how to make it work, and it's become a very viable method. So I understand that. To me, it feels like, yeah, there are things we need to really be careful about in ADUs, but just to say that because that they will inevitably result in unresolvable conflicts is not consistent with the history. We can do this. We can regulate this in a way that establishes sound guardrails and guidelines and develop a new model. So I appreciate that. So just for my, we don't deal much with special exceptions, of course, because that's a different body. But let's say that was part of it. Could you walk through how you see that happening, the application process and whatever?
I'm not completely familiar with how the special exception application goes. Okay. And
maybe Ann can do it then.
Yeah, maybe Ann could explain that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we were to put, I'm just example, detached ADUs as a special exception in any zoning district, they would need to apply for a special exception or a conditional use permit. They're the same thing. If we have it listed, it would go to the Board of Adjustment. If we have standards that we have already written in the zoning ordinances, those would apply to that special exception. There's not a lot of negotiation there. The Board of Adjustment could also make suggestions at additional standards or additional conditions for approval, adding screening to the property or things like that. The town would also have an opportunity to review it. So typically when we get a special exception application, we send a copy of that to the town. And we ask for their opinion. We ask that they address it during a town board meeting. During that meeting, they would be able to make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment, whether they think it sounds good or sounds bad, or they absolutely don't want to see it. And they could also suggest conditions at that point as well. So they could say, we would like to recommend approval. However, we'd like to see A, B, and C conditions attached for whatever reason. Anytime you're attaching conditions, however, they can only be to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. So you can't just add conditions because you think something sounds good or because you want to please a neighbor or something like that. They really need to be justified, they need to be measurable, and they need to be possible for the applicant to do. If the applicant agrees to all of those conditions and the standards, you have to grant that special exception. You cannot deny it. So I don't see a place where the town could say, absolutely not, we don't want this here. Then the Board of Adjustment says, well, the town said, no, we can't approve it. That's not really something they can do.
That's my understanding too. Yeah.
That said, the town could appeal the decision, and this could end up in like a circuit court situation.
But
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
were you talking about special exceptions going through a process of the Board of Adjustment? I mean, we've talked about concerns about the Board of Adjustment having sway over the location of accessory dwelling units. I thought what the chairman was talking about was sending it to the town. I didn't think you were talking about sending it to the Board of Adjustment. Am I right, Tony?
Correct, yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying
Thank you.
that it would be a special exception approved by the town. And I'm thinking that if you, I realize all the rest of the special exceptions are referred back to the Board of Adjustments, but if you write in that section of there that that this is specifically approved by the town, not the Board of Adjustments, then it goes to the town. My idea when I was sitting there thinking, so I don't, yeah,
Can I
listening.
add to that just before we get too far into this,
Sure.
into the weeds? We wouldn't be able to do it necessarily exactly like that, but it could be added as a standard of the permit
Okay.
approval that the town has to make, has to approve this as well. So that could be added. It could be added just to R1, it could be added to all of them, however you'd be comfortable with.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
if I could. And I kind of see this here as a place to start a compromise. You know, for a special exception, it would be granted like in like R1 and GA. Because right now we got that, 8-to-1 like ratio in GA. Now all of a sudden you're gonna double that. It's gonna screw up that whole like general ag. But if there's a special exception for those zones, then a person could apply for it. And I think that'd be a great compromise, or at least a place to start, in my opinion.
so let's not talk about it as a special, how can we refer this to as? A conditional standard or something like that, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, it says would be a standard that, as Anne phrased it, would be a standard that specified that it would need to be approved by
So it's like a
the town
a
board.
town review standard or something.
Well, yeah, whatever
Yeah,
it
yeah.
gets called. That's Christian's department.
Well, let's
Poor
talk,
Christian.
let's talk about that right now. It's important. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Christian,
I'm gonna have to dig into that because I would be pretty hesitant to let the ball get rolling too far on that because,
It may
state
not be.
statute provides mechanisms for zoning permitting and the Board of Adjustments and to kind of, township explicit approval is not included in those statutes, and to try and create an end around for that, I'm not certain it's legal. So.
understood. Other thoughts?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems like, assuming that we're not bypassing the law, it actually seems to me like a reasonable compromise in R1. I thank Tony for having lots of good ideas here. It seems very reasonable to me. I understand that there might be complications.
It is, and I think, like, typically, it has to be clear, your laws have to be clear, what you have to do in order to be
Right.
in compliance with them or not. And if one of our conditions is approval by a town board, you have no way of knowing at the outset whether you're gonna get that or not. So I think,
Well, the town board would have to make that decision based on some justifiable standards.
Right.
And would that be sufficient to address the concerns that people have? It couldn't be just, we don't want them, right? I don't think.
May I?
Yep.
So if this idea doesn't work, if it turns out it's not legal, would another alternative be to have a requirement that the lot be double the minimum lot size, right? And then there's no possibility of circumventing the minimum lot size if they get subdivided later? Would something like that address the concern?
That would, as far as, yeah, that would, I would think that would stop you from asking for a special exemption to divide the lot into a smaller than standard lot size. Yes. And I think, you talked about the town of Tainer has got concern, a lot of them are minimum lot size to begin with. That would mean that they would throw a whole bunch of them out.
Mhm.
It wouldn't be an option.
Right.
I mean, in general, I like Tom's point that this needs to be a collaborative process. I don't want to strong arm anybody into it. And if we can find ways to do this that meet the concerns, I would like to do that.
I have to say this because I feel like if I don't, I'm withholding information. So there is also a possibility that the BOA, their I don't know, their authority for conditional uses and special exceptions could be moved to the PRND. This is something that other counties have done. BOA would still need to see variances. So if you were to do a variance, say, not, meeting some standard, they would still review that. However, it could be done that PRND becomes that authority rather than Board of Adjustment. There's a process, but it's something that's there. So I just needed to say that so it was out there for you.
Yeah.
We don't have this as an action item today, and I think that there are a couple of ideas that have been floated that I would like people who are smarter than I am, that would be Ann and Christian, to take up. I wonder if at this point we couldn't say, can you research these suggestions and potential compromises and bring it back to us at a point where we then would resume the public hearing and ask for additional input. Sort of seems to me that we can't continue this particular discussion without some information and suggestions from the staff.
Sense? Are there any objections to that? Well, maybe that's where we're at, because we've got some good ideas that may or may not work and may need to have additional work on. But if they did work, they might allow us to provide some kind of acceptable path forward. And I am struck by, thinking back to all the testimony, the informal testimony that we've had over the past months, the number of people who are not in residential areas, but in general ag, who have said, we really want this for our family. This makes a lot of sense. I really, if we can find a way to help those people improve their lives and well-being, I think we should try and do it. So let's ask staff to do that. We still have this public hearing to deal with, which is scheduled for our next meeting. I wonder what the proper way to address that is. Should we just convene it next? Any thoughts?
I think my preference would be to kind of convene it as scheduled, and assuming it's highly likely this is not ready to actually be
And we can,
formally submitted to the board, we just close the public hearing and pull the.
so would, depending upon the, I suppose we could accept some testimony and people want to comment. That's always been helpful to us. So, but not recess again if we need to. Yeah. Okay. That okay with everybody? Mike?
Yeah, could you or Christian or Ann summarize what it is that they are going to research and look at?
There you go.
Possible solutions?
So as I understand it, they're kind of specific to kind of concerns that have been raised about R1. There are a number of options available to the committee. So we currently have juniors and attached ADUs in R1. So the options are either we can eliminate those from R1 entirely, one or the other, either junior or the attached ADUs. We can move those down into these sections for special exceptions or leave it as is. I think eliminating that all of them.
Researching whether we can have a standard
Right. And then,
as a permitted use.
yeah, and then third whether townships and minimum
Yeah, so
lot.
it's town minimum lot size. Or, I guess.
I think it would be, what I was suggesting would be double town minimum lot size.
Lot size. For me, it would be just an R1.
Explain, Dan. The double lot size would just be in R1.
Yeah, I mean, we are suggesting that there might be some potential compromises in R1. One of them might be minimum lot size, one of them might be town approval, although Christian is telling us that that's not maybe appropriate because of the clarity of the statute. Then I would object, but I suppose the other one is to take junior ADUs out of R1, and I would not be happy about that, obviously.
I don't, Monica, was your suggestion was not just R1 though, was it?
I was thinking of R1 specifically just because that's where the concerns have been raised. I haven't heard concerns about R2 and R3, so I don't see the need to do that, but I wouldn't be opposed.
Well,
to
we
it,
just
I suppose.
heard concerns about general ag, for example. Just,
Oh, I see. I guess I would think that doing double the minimum lot size for GA might make sense too.
I think for discussion purposes, it does. Why are you angry at me? Or why are you frustrated, Dan? I'm just going we can always have that discussion and, there.
No.
Yeah, I mean, for the
Yeah.
most part, so
Okay, let's try and get any confusion you might have.
So so we're looking into kind of how the ordinance would be worded if we removed the various ADUs from R1 altogether, how it would look if we were to incorporate standards governing the minimum lot sizes as written in the townships land division ordinances is what we're looking at. Yep. And then third, the possibility of incorporating ADUs as special exceptions, how that would look if submitted to the Board of Adjustments and whether it's possible for the Board of Adjustments to be kind of bound by a township's recommendation. Giving townships.
I thought that we were looking at avoiding the BOA altogether.
Okay, so
Looking at some kind of town-based standard,
all right.
town decision standard.
I think I have it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Carrie.
could my preference would be to also put like your GA in there on your compromise, because that's,
That's,
my township is probably 95% GA, and that's where I live. And, we've had a lot of surveys when we've done our comprehensive plan. That was one of the biggest, what people wanted was the rural characteristics. So I think that's got to be addressed in there too.
So looking at incorporating minimum lot sizes into GA or removing ADUs altogether from GA.
we would,
Just have a compromise.
we would incorporate the minimum lot size in GA. Okay. Any other comments, thoughts? Anybody? All right. You guys are doing a lot of work on this and it's taking a lot of time. It's much appreciated. Let's see, I don't think we have any other action or other discussion or items for discussion today. Are there any announcements? Okay, then our next meeting will be April 17th, depending upon how the committee's constituted at that point in time. And that will be a public hearing. Okay, then we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.